All right. Good evening. We're learning Maseches Bava Basra, Daf Yomi, and Daf Tesvav, as we have a very heavy set of blot ahead of us. Let's get started. 2 lines from the bottom on Yud Gimel Amud Beis. The Gemara says, Tana Rabbanan Harota L'Dabek Torah Nevi'im Uksuvim Ke'echad Medabek. A person who wants to make one massive Sefer Torah that would include all 24 books of the biblical canon, all the way from the very beginning, all the way to the very end, starting with Breshis, Divrei Hayamim, all the way to the end, whatever it is. Halacha l'maisa medabek, you're allowed to make a Sefer Torah like that. This, what? Yeah. L'chora, you're allowed to learn from it. Otherwise, it's not much of a point. Ve'ose berosho kedei lagul amud. In the beginning of the scroll, on the Bereshis end of the scroll, you need to leave enough parchment that it would wrap around the amud, that it would wrap around the wood of the Eitz Chaim. Let's call that 3 inches, 2 inches in the circumference. Uvesofo kadei lagul hekif. This is different. At the end, we need enough white parchment to do 1 lap around the scroll, not around the amud. Okay, so on the front end, you have an extra 3, let's call it 3-4 inches of parchment. But at the end of the sefer, it's going to be a huge scroll. You need 1.5 feet of blank white parchment. That's expensive. That's already it's a commitment. So that's the distinction between the beginning of a Torah and the end. And we learned this din yesterday, that if a Navi ends on the bottom line of a page, even though normally we do add 3 lines of blank space, but if it ends at the bottom of a page, we can start at the top of the next page, even though there are no blank lines. And if, as it relates to the Nevi'im, at least you are allowed to cut between the Nevi'im if you so desired. Okay. Now, this last line is a little difficult. My Ka'amar, what is this then of my v'im balach tochotech? We know, of course, that you're allowed to have Shmuel be separate from Malachim and Malachim. We know that already, so there's no chiddush over here. It says Gemara Hachi Kamar, you just misunderstood the brisa, or really the brisa wasn't written in a clean way. It shouldn't say v'im balach tochotech. It should say she'im balach tochotech. And now let's go back a half a line, and we'll understand what it means. On the bottom line of Yud Gimel Amud Beis, when it says that we're allowed, when a Navi ends on the very bottom of a page, we're allowed to not add 3 blank lines. That is so that she'im, that if you then cut right there, then the new Navi will start on the top of a line, at the top of a page, top of a column. That's what the Gemara says. The Gemara says we have a kasha from a brisa. Tchila sefer v'sofo k'dei lagul. We have a brisa that seems to conflict with what we said earlier. We said in our brisa that we started with that on the front end by Breshis, you need to have a little bit of parchment, enough to make 1 loop around the Eitz Chaim. And then we had said that by the end of a Sefer Torah, or by the end of all 24 books of the canon, whatever you choose to write in, you need enough parchment to make 1 lap around the whole scroll. Let's call it 18 inches, whatever the actual circumference is. But this brisa says, Tchila Sefer v'sofo k'dei lagul. It seems over here that they had the same shiur for the Reisha and the Seifa. K'dei lagul mai. What are we wrapping around? If what you're saying is that we only need enough parchment in both front and back in order to go around the amud, then that's a problem for the end of the Torah. And if you say what you're using the shiur for the end of the Torah, then kasha amud, then the Reisha and the Seifa of the Torah, the beginning and end of the Torah, the free parchment is different shiurim. So this brisa is like almost just casual about it. It's like, oh yeah, it's kedei lagul amud, or just kedei lagul, and we don't know what it means. Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, you're analyzing too much. Really, let's stud and Ketani. It means different shiurim for each one. It was just speaking generally that we need to have some blank parchment. No problem. Rav Ashi Amar Kitanya Hahi b'Sefer Torah. The difference is with the Sefer Torah. That brisa is talking about a Sefer Torah. Kidatanya. Kol asfarim niglalim mitchilasan l'sofan. All of the svarim can be rolled on 1 roll, namely that they have 1 Eitz Chaim, or they're like a Megillah where there's no Eitz Chaim. But the Sefer Torah, nigla le'emtziyaso, a Sefer Torah is rolled to its middle, namely that it has 2 Atzei Chaim, and there is a middle. V'oselo amud elech ve'elech. And there should be a little bit of parchment on each side. So there's different halachos by this massive Torah Nevi'im Ksuvim Sefer Torah, as opposed to a regular Sefer Torah where it's not the same halachos. Amar Rabbi Eliezer Bereb Tzadok Kachayu Kosvei Svarim Shebirushalayim Osen Sifrein. And that is what they would do. They would treat the Sefer Torah. They put them on 2 different on 2 Atzei Chaim, which is the way that we have our Sefer Torah. And that the reason it would be kosher if we had a Sefer Torah like all in 1 scroll. Very difficult to manage logistically. It's heavy. I remember when I was in Poland, we came across some small little hole in the wall kind of a shul, and they had a Sefer Torah that was made out of extremely thick skin. it was like 60, 70 pounds. It was really, really, really heavy, and it was very tall. And when you opened it, the ink was already not, you didn't want to touch it. It was like really, really fragile. And they told us it was deer skin. I don't know anything about deer skin versus the skin we use, but it was very, very thick. Then the Gemara teaches a din, and it's a din that's almost impossible to keep. It says the Gemara Tanu Rabbanon, Ein osin sefer Torah, lo orko yoser al hekefo, lo hekefo yoser al orko. The circumference and the height should be identical. Very difficult to do. The Gemara says, Shalu es Rebbe shiur sefer Torah bekama. How does this actually work out? And he said, well, it depends what you use. Amar lahen begvil. If you're going to be using gvil, then shisha, then that's going to be 6 tfachim. Rashi, 8, 9 lines down, begvil, shehu of. The hekefo gadol, it's a thick type of cloth, and therefore the circumference is very wide. Sarach shisha tfachim, zohi mida, lihios nigmar, b'shisha tfachim hekef, b'chsad beinani. If you write in an average font, so then you're going to need 6 tfachim all the way around. Again, it's 24 inches. It's not stam. That's like the size of a medium-sized Sefer Torah that we have. The NCSY Sefer Torah is probably a little bit bigger than that, not much bigger, but it is. But beklaf bekama, what about klaf, which is our regular thinner parchment? And our parchment is gorgeous compared to what they had. Our parchment is perfectly thin, it's perfectly smooth, it's stunning. It's really beautiful what we have. We have no hasaga. When I was in Eretz Yisrael in February, we were at a Sefer Torah place. They have Sefer Torah from Iraq from like 700 years ago, like really old, ancient looking, and the cloth looks nothing like what we have. It was treated, it looked shiny, it was treated, which we've seen in the Gemara before as well. I think they were treated with egg. I think there were some old treatments of the parchment.
The same color was a different color, right?
It was brown.
Yeah.
Had a very dark tinge to it.
I
I don't know.
Was black ink on brown?
Has to be black ink, but it just has to be on parchment. But the parchment was very dark on both sides, and it looked more leathery on the. It looked more like like the inside of the baseball glove is kind of grainy. That was like the back of the Sefer Torah. The front was very, very smooth and shiny. Yeah, that's right. It wasn't quite as thick, but yeah, same. Yeah, it wasn't super brown. It was like tan. It was like, kind of tan looking. Yeah. It was very legible, but I have some pictures on my phone for another time of how some customs used to make the letter Fe totally differently than we do. Fascinating. I'll pull them up after. It's really, really amazing. And how do they fit into Shulchan Aruch? We didn't have a Shulchan Aruch 700 years ago. So these are like really important sugyas, like that means that some of the Rishonim learned the sugyas differently than the Shulchan Aruch, which is just fascinating. Okay, not for now. Beklaf bekama, what about regular thinner cloth? Eini yodea, unbelievable. Rebbe didn't know the shiur for regular cloth, which means that he didn't have regular cloth, which means that the Sifrei Torah from his time were all the thicker cloth. That was what he knew about. Rav Huna Kasav Shivin Sifrei de Oraisa. Oh, that's a lot of work. He wrote 70 Sifrei Torah, velo isramile elachad, and he only was successful in meeting this ratio of circumference to height in one of the 70. Very difficult to do. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Kasav Chad. He wrote one Sefer Torah on the hide of an egel. The Isramila, he nailed it on the first time. Beginner's luck, master craftsman, I don't know. It's impossible because you don't even know how many sheets you're going to need on the front end. Like, it's very difficult to measure. Like, and you have to pre-cut the height before you create the circumference. It's very difficult to measure. I mean, they were approximating. Yoavu Bey Rabbanan Einayu, and then he was so successful, people were looking at him like, oh, look at this guy. And that's an Ayin Hara, as we've seen in this Masechta and earlier ones. Nach Nafshe, and he died. It's not Gishmak. Don't look at other people negatively. Amrulei Rabbanan le Rav Hamnuna. Isn't that negative?
Not necessarily negative.
Well, I never would have crossed my mind that it would have been anything other than negative. Certainly isn't positive. You're saying they said what a great job he did and then he died?
Envious.
But that's
necessarily complimentary. Jealous. Yeah.
Why could he do it?
Envious, I wish I could do it. Jealous is why did he get to do it?
I don't know.
Not sure.
Okay. Amr le Rabbanan le Rav Hamnuna. Kasav Rabbi Ami Dalid Mehea Sifrei Torah. That's a long. How did he have time to learn? He wrote 400 Sifrei Torah. So Amar Lahu, he said back to them, Lav Dafka. Dilma, what he wrote was that which is equivalent to a Sefer Torah, namely Torah Tivulana Moshe Kasav. He wrote that line 400 times. That alone would take a long time. Right? 400 Sifrei Torah. If you live for 50 years, I mean, that's just not shaykh. That's
They say 50 years.
Yo, start.
if you live for 50 years, that's 8 Sifrei Torah a year. That's
50
like,
years already.
yeah, it's
50 years.
that means he wrote basically one a month, which is again. But so the Gemara pushes back, and anyways, we should always remember that the number 400 in Shas is there's something going on. We see that all the time. Amar le Rava le Reb Zera. We're a third of the way down. Reb Zera sorry. Amar le Rava le Reb Zera nata Rav Yanai arba mea karmi. He said that Rav Yanai planted 400 vineyards. Amar le, that's ridiculous. Dilma shtaim keneged shtaim ve'echad yotzei zona. Maybe it was in the format of, as we used to call in the back in the day, a 1-2-2 defense. That's how it was built. You had a 2 in a box shape, 2 and 2 in a box shape, and you had 1 at the top. So that maybe that's how it was built, and maybe he planted 400 of those. There's no way he planted 400 massive vineyards. He's one guy. It's just it's not feasible. Meisvei. This meisvei will not be asked until the top of the Amud. But this is a very well-known brisa which speaks about the size and the contents of the aron, which is a fascinating Gemara and a machlokas that we will soon see. There's a machlokas in how many tfachim are in an amma, and therefore what was able to therefore fit inside the aron. Did the Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu fit, or did it not fit? So we'll have to see. The Gemara says, Meisvei, aron she'asa Moshe amosayim v'chetzi arko. It was 2.5 amos wide, the amma v'chetzi rachbo, 1.5 amos in the other, so x and y axis. The amma v'chetzi komaso, and 1.5 tall. So it was 2.5 amos by 1.5 amos by 1.5 amos. And this was within the Tanakama Shita, who we'll soon see as Rav Meir. That is be'ama bas shisha tfachim. That assumes that there's 6 tfachim. So we're just going to look at the x and y axis. We're not looking at the height. So on the x and y axis, you have 2.5 times 6, which is 15, and you have 1.5 times 6, which is 6 plus 3 is 9. So it's 15 by 9 in tfachim. So the haluchos orchan shisha v'rachman shisha was 6 by 6 for avyan shlosha, and they had a thickness of 3. We're only going to focus on the 6 by 6 piece. Munachos keneged orko shel aron, and it was on the length of the aron on the 2.5 direction. So the 6s were going in the 2.5 direction. Kama luchos ochlos be'aron. How much space did it take up? Well, shneimosar tvachim. How much was left? Nishtayru sham shlosha tvachim, because as we said on the 2.5 side, 2.5 times 6 is 15. 15 minus 12, which was the luchos, was 3 tvachim. And say mehen tefach, we have to remove one of those 3 tvachim because of the walls. Chetzio lekosel zeh v'chetzio lekosel zeh. So each wall was half of a tefach wide. Nishtaru sham shnei tvachim shebahen sefer Torah munach. So according to this first shita in the brisa, the aron held the luchos on the length on the long wall, the 2.5 amma wall, and the way that it worked, an exact measure was half tefach wall, 12 tefach luchos, 2 tefach Torah, half tefach wall, and that equals 15. And how do we know the Sefer Torah was in there? Shneimar ein ba'aron rak shnei luchos avanim asher hiniach sham Moshe v'gomer. But what is ein and rak? It's a double negative. My ein ba'aron rak. That's a miut achar miut. Whenever a pasuk has a double negative, that teaches us something. When it's miut achar miut, ve'ein miut achar miut ela l'rabos. That is only in a scenario that only is to teach us an inclusion. The double negative, and we have this in the math world too. When you multiply 2 minuses, the result is a positive. So the Gemara says if we have a double negative, it's a positive. What's included? Sefer Torah shemunach be'aron. Very good. So now on the axis of the 2.5 width, we're doing great. Says the Gemara, Pirnasta aron la'arko. You've explained and you figured out, you've accounted for all of the tfachim on that side. Very good. What about in the other direction? How much was the other direction? It was 1.5 tefach, 1.5 amos multiplied by 6, because according to this first shita, it's 6 tefach per amo, which is 9 tefachim. So say uparnes aron lerochbo. We have to factor in the width of the aron. Kama luchos ochlos ba'aron shisha tvachim, because the x and y axis of the luchos were 6 by 6. So therefore, of the 9 that we have, 6 were taken up by the luchos. Nishtayru sham shlosha tvachim. Semehen tefach chetzio lekosel zeh v'chetzio lekosel zeh. The walls were a half on all 4 sides, and therefore on the 9 side, 1 full tefach is removed for the wall, and that brings us down from 9 to 8. And then we have the 6 tvachim of the luchos, and what we're left with is 2. Nishtayru sham shnei tvachim shelo yehei sefer Torah nichnas v'yotze kshu dachuk divrei Reb Meir. It's very, very tight under those circumstances to keep the sefer Torah there. But Lamaisa, he ended up saying that it does work. This is all within the shita of Rav Meir. We're going to figure out the math in a few minutes as to how it actually fit. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, I agree, of course, the Psukim and Chumash say that it was 2.5 by 1.5 on the X and Y axis, the Aron. I agree. What I don't agree with is Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said that an Amma has 6 tfachim. Rav Meir said that an Amma has 6 tfachim. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. This is a Shas Machlokes. It's just showing its head over here. We're 15 lines or so from the bottom on Yudal and Amadala. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ba'Amma bas chamisha tfachim. Really, an Amma has 5 tfachim. So now let's change everything, right? If an Amma is 5 tfachim, so 2.5 times 5 is 12.5, not 15. That's on the length side. On the width side of the Aron, it was 1.5, which is now 7.5 in tfachim, so totally different. V'haluchos orkan shisha v'rachban shisha v'avyan shlosha munachos ba'orako shel Aron. So there we have a very, very small amount of space because the whole entire thing was 12.5 and the luchos were 12. Kama luchos ochlos ba'aron shnei masar tfachim nishtar sham chati tefach etzba lekosel zeh ve'etzba lekosel zeh. According to this shita, the only way that the Aron would fit inside the Aron is if the walls were not 1/2 a tefach thick, but the walls were 1/4 of a tefach thick. Why? Because the entire outside measurement of the Aron was 12.5, but the luchos were put inside, which means that they're 12, which means we only have 0.5 left, which means that according to Yehuda, the walls of the Aron must each be 1/4 of 1 tefach, totaling 1/2 a tefach, because it's 12 plus whatever the walls are. So that's a snug fit. So that's what he says. And Pirnas to Aron le'orko, within the camp of Rabbi Yehuda, you've explained the long side, the 2.5 amma, or the 12.5, tefach. You've explained that. Seu parnes Aron le'rochbo. Now let's talk about the width of the Aron, which is 1.5 amos, or 7.5 tefachim. Say parnes Aron le'rochbo. Kama luchos ogdos be'Aron. How much space did the luchos take up? Shisha tefachim. Nishter sham tefach u'mechza. Within the tefach measurements, it was only 7.5 tefachim wide, and now we put in the luchos, which are 6 wide, so 7.5 minus 6 leaves us over with exactly 1.5. Say mehen chatzi tefach etzba u'mechza lekosel zeh. We have to take out a chatzi tefach. It's an etzba mechza lekosel zeh, ve'etzba mechza lekosel zeh. Nishtayr sham tefach shabo amudin omdin. So here what we're saying is that on the width of the Aron, it's 1.5 amos, which is 7.5 tefachim. 7.5 tefachim minus the 6 of the luchos, minus a total of 1/2 of wall. So that means that we're left with 1 tefach left. What went in that space? There were some silver poles that were actually stored there. Shene'emar, as the pasuk says, a pasuk in Shir Hashirim, Apir Yon, Asala melech shelamu me'atzeh levanon, amudim asa kesef rupida, so zahav merkavo argaman ve'chulei. Basically, there were wood covered in metal, and they were stored inside the Aron, according to Rabbi Yehuda. And then a historical note, the Plishtim, when they had stolen the Aron for the amount of time that they had stolen it, it's not a good thing to steal from Hashem. So the people in Plishtim were not really doing very well. They had all of these negative things happen when they had the Aron in their possession. And they gave it back, but they gave it back with a gift. And the Gemara says 4 lines from the bottom, Ve'argaz, the box, sheshigru bo Plishtim doron elokei Yisrael munach mitzido. Next to the Aron was the box that the Plishtim gave as reparations, because they knew they made an error. Shene'emar, as the pasuk says, and this is a pasuk from Shmuel. The pasuk says, "Ves klei hazav asher hashevosem lo asham tasimu v'argaz mitzido v'shilachtam oso v'halach." And basically, they gave a box next to it, and in that box, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the olav sefer Torah munach. Because remember, according to Shitas Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that an amma only has 5 tefachim, there was no room for the sefer Torah inside the Aron. Where then did the Aron stay? Where did the Sefer Torah stay? Sorry, let me say the sentence again. That was incorrect. According to Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that an Amma has 5 tefachim, there was no room for the Sefer Torah in the Aron. Where then did the Sefer Torah rest? it rested on the box that the Plishtim gave when they returned the Aron, next to the Aron, but not in the Aron. So Machlokes Tanaim, because of the Machlokes of how many Tfachim are in an Amma, therefore we're not sure where the Sefer Torah was. Rabbi Meir says it was in the Aron. Rabbi Yehuda says it didn't fit because it was only 5 amos per tefach, 5 tefach per amma, and therefore it was in the box that the Plishtim gave. Shenemar, as the pasuk says in Sefer Dvarim, Lakoach es Sefer HaTorah ze v'samtem oso mitzad Aron bris Hashem. Mitzad hu munach v'lo besocha. Oh, very good. Now we have a problem. According to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that there are only 5 tfachim in an amma, and therefore the Torah doesn't fit. The problem is that Rav Meir had a drasha that the Torah fit because he had the miut achar miut. So the Gemara asks on Rabbi Yehuda, Umani mekayim ein ba'aron rak. According to the Shita Rabbi Yehuda, what was the miut achar miut coming to include? So says the Gemara, Lerabos, turning to the top of your Dalet Amud Beis, Lerabos shivrei luchos, to teach us that the broken luchos were put inside there. How exactly it fit, the Gemara doesn't say. They were put in shemunachim ba'aron. Says the Gemara, I have another question for you. Top of your Dalet Amud Beis. V'isal kadaitach sefer Torah hakefo vav tfachim. If you want to say that a sefer Torah has a hekef, has a circumference of vav tfachim, michti kol sheyesh behekefo shlosha tfachim yesh bo rochav tefach. If what we're going to say is that the circumference of a sefer Torah is similar to its length, so if the circumference is 3, the rochav is 1. But by a sefer Torah which is on 2 atzei chayim, v'chevan de la'amtziaso niglal nafi shlemi trei tafcha ravcha de beni beni basre betrei pushre hechi yossi. There's no way the sefer Torah would fit, because if you take out any sefer Torah right now, the atzei chayim are distanced in such a way that there's always a little bit of a gap between the right side of the scroll and the left side of the scroll. They're never really touching. They're constantly shifting with each other. There's always a little space. And because of that, says the Gemara, it wouldn't fit in the 2 tefach space that Reb Meir said existed. Even according to Reb Meir, that an amma has 6 tefachim, but there's only an exact amount of space of 2 tefachim. But if a sefer Torah has a length that is similar to the circumference, and if a sefer Torah is on 2 atzei chayim, there's not enough room. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, sefer azara l'tchilaso hu niglal. That in this case it was only on 1 eitz chayim, and therefore the math would work. Everything fit on 1. Says the Gemara, but still it's not such a gishmak fit. Ve'akati trei b'trei hechi yasiv. It's so exacting that it's going to fit. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Ashi dekarach beporta ve'karche le'el. It's all on 1, but you're right. When it's all on 1, it's 2 tefachim. I agree. It's 2. The girth is 2 tefachim. I agree. But what they did is they rolled a little bit off of it to make the main part of it smaller, and there was a small extra roll that they just kind of kept on top. So if you can imagine, they had,
just roll.
Right, not on an Eitz Chaim, just rolled and resting there, like a Megillah. But there's 1 Eitz Chaim. But at the end, let's say by Sefer Dvarim, they just rolled up the last couple of parshios, Zosa Bracha, or whatever. They rolled them up and then they plunked it on top just to sit there. That's what the Gemara says over here. Asks the Gemara of Rabbi Yehuda, Mikame de Lesi Arga Sefer Torah. According to you, who said that the Sefer Torah was resting on the box from the Plishtim, fine. But what happened before the box of the Plishtim? There wasn't always a box from the Plishtim. So the Gemara says, Heichi Hava Yosef, where was the Sefer Torah resting? The Gemara says, Dapa Hava Nafik Minei. There was a shelf that protruded from the Aron. Yosef Ilava, Sefer Torah. Okay. The Rav Meir, I have a kasha for you. Rabbi Yehuda had a Mari Makom that said, based on the pasuk, when the Plishtim returned the box and the Aron, he had the language of Mitzad Aron. Hi Mitzad Aron, my Avidle. I understand what Rabbi Yehuda did with it. That's how he said that the Sefer Torah was put on the side of the Aron. But you, Rav Meir, don't hold that the Sefer Torah was on the side of the Aron. So what does the language of Mitzad Aron teach us? Says the Gemara, Haumi boile de misnach le mitzad, v'lo misnach beini luche, u'l'olam begave minatzad. What it means is like this. You ever play the game Traffic? You know, you got these little cars on a board, you have to move them around, right? So the way that we would have assumed is that the two luchos were next to each other, and the Sefer Torah was at the end. So you have Sefer Torah, luach, luach. Now, in theory, we could have played traffic and separated them and put the Sefer Torah in the middle. That's what Minat Sad comes to say. You cannot put the Sefer Torah between the luchos. The two luchos are conjoined, not physically or mechanically. What the pasuk means, according to Rav Meir, is that you're not allowed to put the Sefer Torah between the two luchos while they're. That's what Minat Sad means. So he gives a beautiful pshat. Says the Gemara, the Rav Meir, according to Rav Meir's math, something couldn't fit because he maximized all the space. You're right, he had more space because he held there were 6 tfachim per amma. But according to Rav Meir, the amudim hecha havu kaime. Where did he put the bars that we saw from Shir Hashirim that were in the Aron? According to Rabbi Yehuda, says the Gemara, Mavroi, they were outside, no problem. The Rav Meir, Shivrei luchos temunachin be'aron minale. How did Rav Meir fit in the Shivrei luchos? Says the Gemara, nafkalemi de Rav Huna. Rav Meir learned it from Rav Huna. That historically makes no sense at all. Rav Meir was a Tana, Rav Huna was an Amora. So we have to be careful when we're learning not to say these things the wrong way. Rav Meir learned nothing from Rav Huna. Rav Meir died before Rav Huna was born by a significant number of years. So the Gemara says he learned it from the same principle of Rav Huna. What does that mean? The Amar Rav Huna, Mai dechsiv asher nikra shem Hashem tzavakos yoshev kruvim alav. This is a pasuk from Shmuel. Why does it say shem twice? Melamed she luchos vishivrei luchos munachim be'aron. So no problem. Rav Meir has a pasuk that indicates that that's the case. It's a drasha that Rav Huna had said. Ve'idach. That's what Rav Meir would say. What would Rabbi Yehuda say? That pasuk of Shem Ahumi Boile Lichad Rav Yochanan to teach us. Tam Rav Yochanan, Amar Rav Shimon ben Yochai, Malamet Shah Shem V'chol Kinuyav Munachim Ba'aron. All of Hashem's names were written down on a piece of paper inside the Aron. Wouldn't you love to see that? That was the name of 42 Shemos. Machlokes Rishonim, was it the Shem of Adnos? Was it Yud Kei Vav Kei? What were all the names? Look in the commentaries. A lot of interesting things to talk about here. The pasuk over here that we said of Shem that Rav Yochanan was darshaning that we need for all the names, all the Tanaim need that. So what's the other Tana going to do? Says the Gemara Nachanami. You're right. And Rav Meir's Marimakom just fell away. He can't use the limit of Rav Yochanan. Therefore, halfway down in your Dalet Amud Beis, Elishivre Luchos demunachin ba'aron minale. How then does Rav Meir know to include the Shivrei Luchos? Says the Gemara, Nafkalemi de Tani Rav Yosef, from a brisa that Rav Yosef taught. Again, historically out of order. That's not what it means. It just means the same brisa. The Tani Rav Yosef, Rav Yosef had a brisa. Now the pasuk doesn't actually read simply this way. I'm going to read the pasuk inside, on the side here, and then we'll read it back in the Gemara. This is a pasuk from Sefer Dvarim. The pasuk says, Ve'echtov al haluchos es hadvarim asher hayu al haluchos harishonim asher shibarta v'samtam be'aron. So let's translate. For the second luchos, he said he's going to write on the second luchos whatever he wrote on the first ones that were broken, asher shibarta, comma, v'samtam be'aron, and then put them in the aron. So the Gemara says, look at how Rav Yosef darshan, asher shibarta v'samtam. He put the comma in a different place. Not the regular place to put the comma. What's the drasha? Melamed shehaluchos v'shivrei luchos munachim ba'aron. Based on the pashtus of the pasuk, it's not necessarily that both of them were there, but based on the way the Rav Yosef darshan the pasuk, where he put the word v'samtam before the comma, even though it's not the way we read the pasuk, al pip shat, doesn't matter. That's how he learned. Idach. What would Rav Yehuda say about this? Now Rav Meir has a beautiful Marimako. Says the Gemara, he needs this drasha of Asher Shibarta v'samtam for something else. Amar Reish Lakish, a famous Gemara, Asher Shibarta, Amar Lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu LeMoshe, Yiyasher kol chacha Shibarta. You did good that you broke it. Kadosh Baruch Hu is saying, if I were in your shoes, I would have done the same exact thing. And by the way, in case you were wondering where the word shkoyach comes from, it is these two words, Yiyasher kochacha. It's not Yasher koach, it's not shkoyach, it is Yeyasher kochacha. But if you say it that way, you'll have no friends. Don't even bother. I'm just being a grammarian for 10 seconds on my soapbox. Oh my gosh, my kids would kill me. They would kill me. Especially in the yeshiva system. There's no. Shkoyach. Shkoyach just means thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Asher koach. But like my mom, when we were growing up, I remember this. Whenever we would finish benching as a family, my mom would always say, Yasher koach. I don't know if this stood out to you as a child. I remember hearing it all. We started to mimic it after a couple of years. Like, sure, kola. We got the southern twang in there. It was great. Some fried chicken stuck in our teeth. It was perfect. Anyways, the Gemara says that the psukim don't pose an issue because everybody has their own drashas. Lamaisa, this is the machlokas that we have in our Gemara between Rav Meir and Rav Yehuda, and it's just interesting to see how a seemingly numerical machlokas of how many tvachim are in an amma has an impact of what was in the yar and what wasn't. Just not everything could fit according to Rav Yehuda, so he had to do all the math. Tana Rabbanan, another famous Gemara, Sidron Shel Nevi'im. This is the order of all of the books of the prophets. You have Yehoshua, V'Shoftim, Shmuel, Umalachim, Yirmiyah, Yechezkel, Yeshaya, V'Shnei Masar. These are all of the Nevi'im. So the Gemara calls it out. Michti, hold on one second. Hosea, which is part of Shnei Masar, Hosea should be Kadim. T'chsiv Tchilas Dvar Hashem BeHosea. This pasuk is in Hosea. It's in the first parak of Hosea that says he was one of the first people to be a Navi. So why wasn't he before Yehoshua? So the Gemara says, V'chi'im Hosea diber tchila? That's not true. Hosea wasn't the first one. V'alom Moshe ve'ad Hosea kama nevi'im hayu. From Moshe to Hosea, Moshe gave the Torah to Yehoshua. Yehoshua gave it to this guy. We don't hear Hosea's name in that list in the beginning of Pirkei Avos. Rav Yochanan, within his tkufa, he was one of the first. But Pashad, he shouldn't be one of the first ones. Ve'eluhain, who were the four that he was with? Hosea, V'Yeshaya, Amos, Umicha. So then the Gemara says, well, fine. Ulakadme leHosea bereisha. At least we should have him after Malachim, but before Yirmiyah. That would have made a lot of sense. Why don't we do that? Why don't we put Hosea there? So the Gemara says, Kevan de Kasiv Nevuase Gabe Chagai Zechariah Malachi, because Hosea's Nevuah wasn't written down until the times of Chagai Zechariah Malachi, which was the end of the period of the Anshe Knesses Hagdola. The Chagai Zechariah Malachi Sof Neviim Chavu. Therefore, Chashiv Lehu Behadayu. Therefore, he was included among them. He was included among them in the last cases of Treasar. The Gemara says, why don't we just write its own sefer of Hosea? Likteme Liyeshaya Beresha. Ooh, sorry, I think I skipped a line. Yep, I did. Says the Gemara, V'lichteve Lichude V'likteme. Why don't we have Hosea be its own sefer? So the Gemara says we couldn't. And this is, listen to this, public policy. Aidi de Zutar, because Hosea is very short, we were afraid that Mirchas, that it would get lost. And we don't want the Navi to get lost. And therefore, because it wasn't long enough, we don't yet know what the minimum threshold is for a Navi to be a standalone sefer, but Hosea was too small. Michti says the Gemara, Yeshaya, Kadam, Mi Yirmiyah v'Yechezkel. Why is it out of order? The order that we have is, let's go back to the list. It's Yirmiyah, Yechezkel, Yeshaya, but really Yeshaya was first. Liktim Eli Shaya Beresha. Why don't we have Yeshaya first? The Gemara says, 10 lines from the bottom of the page. Kevan de Malachim, Sofei Churbana. The end of Sefer Malachim was destruction. The Yirmiyah Kule Churbana, and almost all of Sefer Yirmiyahu is Churban. The Yechezkel Reishe Churbana v'Sefer Nechemta. And the flow of Yechezkel is at the beginning is Churban and the end is Nechama. And V'Yeshaya Kule Nechemta, what we did is Samchinan Churbana l'Churbana. The Nechemta l'Nechemta, we're playing dominoes. The twos are next to the twos, the threes are next to the threes. We want all the Puranus to be together and all the Nechama to be together. That's why it was ordered that way. All of that speaks about Nevi'im. What about Ksuvim? Says the Gemara, Sidron Shel Ksuvim, Rus, V'Sefer Tehillim, V'Iyov, U'Mishlei, Koheles, Shir HaShirim, V'Kinos. Kinos is a reference to Eicha. We call it Eicha. The Gemara calls it Kinos. Daniel, U'Megillas Esther, Ezra V'Divrei HaYomim. That's the flow of events in Ksuvim. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. According to those who hold that Iyuv lived in the times of Moshe, he should be much earlier in the food chain. Why is he so late in the line? Doesn't make any sense. He's all the way in Ksuvim. If he lived in the times of Moshe, put him before Yehoshua. Why is he all the way in Ksuvim? Says the Gemara, because it's not right to start out a set of anything, of Ksuvim anything, with Pur Anus. Says the Gemara, I hear you, but Rus Nami Pur Anusi. The story of Rus was very sad. A lot of people died. It wasn't a Geshmak story. So it says the Gemara, Pur Anus de Isle Achris. You're right. But what happened with Rus, much as it started as a Pur Anus, there were Peiros from that. David HaMelech emanated from Rus. And that's actually where we get her name from. To Amar of Yochanan, Lama Nikra Shema Rus. Sheyatzi mimenu David, sherivahu le'akadosh baruch hu b'shiros v'sishbachos. Rivahu b'shiros v'sishbachos rus. A little plan. Where's a little notricon? Umik Savan, who wrote all of these things? Moshe Kasav Sifro. Moshe wrote the 5 books of Moses, thus named 5 books of Moses. And he also wrote Uparshas Bilam. Why is this being added here? Not for now. The Eov. Yoshua Kasav Sifra V'Shmona Psukim Shebatorah. Yoshua wrote Sefer Yoshua. He also wrote the last 8 psukim in the Torah, ones that talk about Moshe dying. Shmuel Kasav Sifra V'Shoftim V'Rus. He wrote those 3. David Kasav Sefer Tehillim Al Yedei Asar Zakanim. David wrote Tehillim with 10 greats. Al Yedei Adam Arishon, Al Yedei Malki Tzedek, Al Yedei Avraham, Al Yedei Moshe, Al Yedei Haman, Al Yedei Yedusan, Al Yedei Asaf. Turning to the top of Tezvav Amud Aleph, Al Yedei Shlosha Bnei Korach. Period. Yirmiyah Kasav Sifra V'Sefer Malachim V'Kinos. He wrote these books, which is again one of them is Eicha. Chizkiya V'Siato Ksavo Yamshak, which is Yeshayim Mishle Shir Shirim and Koheles. Great Shabbos table acronym. What are the books that the Chizkiyahu wrote? It's Yamshak. Anshe Knesset Agdola Kasvo Kandag. They wrote Yechezkel, Shnemasar, Daniel, and Megillah Esther. And Ezra Kasav Sifro V'Yiches Shel Divrei Hayamim Ad Lo. And he wrote his lineage in Sefer Divrei Hayamim up to his own. It says the Gemara, Mesayeh Leila Rav. This actually works out nicely with the sheet of Rav. To Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Yeah. Lo Allah Ezra mi Bavel ad sheyiches atzmo ve'Allah. First, he had to write down his lineage before he was Ola, which is what he did. Uman Aske, who finished writing for him, says the Gemara, Nechemya ben Chachalya. Another person finished off the book for him. Amar Mar, Yoshua Kasav Sifro Shmona Psukim Shebatorah. We just said that Yoshua wrote Sefer Yoshua in the last 8 psukim. Tanya, Keman de Amar, Shmona Psukim Shebatorah Yoshua Kasvan. This is like the Brisa that says that Yoshua wrote it. De Tanya, Vayamas Sham Moshe Eved Hashem. After all, Efshar Moshe Meis V'Kasa Vayamas Sham Moshe. Moshe wrote the whole Sefer Torah, including his death. Ella Adkan Kasav Moshe. Up until the last 8 psukim Moshe wrote. Bikan Ve'elech, but the last 8 were written Kasav Yoshua. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Is it Rabbi Yehuda? Yeah? Does anyone see that? Yeah, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. I have a correction on the side here. V'amrila Rav Nechemya. Some say it was Rav Nechemya. So that means, according to these shitas, then that means that Yehoshua wrote it. But the Gemara raises an issue with that. Amar lo Reb Shimon, Efshar Sefer Torah Chaser Os Achas. You don't have a Sefer Torah if they don't have all the letters in it. I've been on NCSY Shabbatons where we found a psul and a Sefer Torah in the middle of Laney. And you're just done because you're in a hotel in the middle of godforsaken somewhere and you're just done. You just roll up the Sefer Torah. You don't do Haftorah, which I thought we did. So I told them that they should. I'm like, oh, the din of Haftorah was a takana. So I thought it was a totally separate din. Incorrect. It's not the psak. I found out after Shabbos, I made a lot of people say brachas to the batala. That's why I don't want to be a posek. Let somebody else do it. Anyways, the Gemara asks, how can it be that the Sefer Torah was kosher without the last 8 psukim? No Sefer Torah is kosher. It was missing a single letter. So says the Gemara, this whole Sefer Torah. Up until the last 8 psukim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu would tell Moshe what to write, and he would write. But Moshe would be Omer v'Kosev. He would repeat and then write. Vaydaber, Vaydaber. Hashem, Hashem. El, Moshe, Moshe. Lemor, Lemor. However, Mikan ve'elech, for the last 8 psukim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Omer Moshe Kosev bedema. The last 8 psukim, he's writing about his own demise. It's a very uncommon thing to write about that chapter of your life. But he was Moshe, and he had a job to do. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu was dictating to him what to write, and then he said, Vayamos Moshe, whatever the language was, and he wrote it. But in this case, he wrote without repeating, and he cried. Kemash and Emar Lahalan, like we have elsewhere in the Torah, well, not really in the Torah, in Sefer Yirmiyah, Vayomer Lahem, Baruch mipiv yikra Elai. It's called Rima'elevani Kosev al HaSefer B'dio. I wrote it down with ink, but I didn't repeat what was said. Keman Azaha, the Amar Rabbi Yeshua Bar Abba, Amar Rav Gidol Amar Rav, Shmon Psukim Shabbator Yachid Kore Osan. According to this, what does it mean according to the Shita that says that one person should read all of those? Lema Rabbi Yehuda hi udelo Reb Shimon. Maybe we should say it's like Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that those 8 psukim were authored by somebody else and not Reb Shimon. Says the Gemara, no, afilu tema Reb Shimon, hold the ishtanu. That once it was done, it was done. We don't treat the psukim differently. It doesn't. It can be anybody. It doesn't have to be one person reading it. It could be. We just treat it as regular Torah at that point. We don't make any distinctions. We said Yoshua Kasav Sifra V'Haksiva Yamos Yoshua ben Nun Eved Hashem. How could he write about his own death? We understand Bekoshi that maybe Moshe did it according to some shitas, but that's certainly not true by Yoshua. So says the Gemara, Da'aske Elazar. Elazar finished it off. It's Elazar ben Aaron. So it's Aaron's son, and he finished off writing Sefer Yoshua. Vaksiv Elazar ben Aaron Mace. How can that be? Da'aske Pinchas. He started. Now there's 3 authors to say for Yoshua. Yoshua started, Elazar continued, and Pinchas finished it off. Shmuel Kasav Sifra. We said Shmuel wrote his own Sefer, but his own Sefer it says Vaksiv Shmuel Mace. Says Gemara. Da'aske Gadachozav and Nasan Nabi. These 2 people, Gadachozav and Nasan Nabi, they finished off the Nabi. David Kasav Sefer Telim Al Desar Zakanim. V'lechshov Nami Eitan Hezrachi. Why don't we talk about Eitan Hezrachi, who should be the 11th author? Says the Gemara. Amarav Eitan Hezrachi Zeu Avram. It's the same person. Eitan Hezrachi is the same exact person. Says the Gemara. Ksiv Hacha Eitan Hezrachi v'Ksiv Hasam mi Heir mi Mizrach Tzedek, which is a reference, of course, to Avram. Kachashiv Moshe v'Kachashiv Haman. You separated Moshe and Haman, but Haman was one of the names of Moshe. Ha'amarab Haman ze Moshe. Says the Gemara. Ksiv Hacha Haman Ksiv Hasam b'chol Beisi Ne'emanhu. After all, the language seems to be very similar. So the Gemara says, and with this we're going to conclude, Trey, Haman, Habu. There were 2 different people, and then one was Moshe and the other one was not. So therefore, of the 10 authors, there's no steer with the Moshes. We're going to stop right here by Moshe Kasav Sifro. We'll pick up Emir Hashem here tomorrow night and hopefully learn 2 very long Amudim and get ourselves to the bottom of Tezayin Amud Aleph. Wishing you all a beautiful night.